In mid-August, ProPublica leaked over 14 hours of secret Project 2025 training videos aimed at future political appointees. What they revealed is that the people behind Project 2025 are just as sinister and anti-democratic as we all thought, but also that they're a bunch of freaks who deserve to be bullied. Luckily, I have a lot of experience bullying freaks. Today's freak is Alexei Wolternist, a Melkite Catholic priest who looks like this.
I'm Alexei Walternist.
Welcome back, Grigory Rasputin. When Alex isn't peddling cure-alls to the Tsar and Tsarina, he's a chronic blue-check retweeter on twitter.x.com. Concerning. Hi, I'm Hoots. This is my channel, and I already reacted to one Project 2025 training video, but the sickos in my audience overwhelmingly voted in favor of another, so we're back to learn about what Project 2025 has to say about how to work with the media. But before we discover what Alex Wolternist has to say about working with the media, I've got to do a little work with today's sponsor, Ground News. Ground News is a website and app developed by a former NASA engineer on a mission to give readers an easy, data-driven, objective way to read the news. Every story comes with a quick visual breakdown of the political bias, factuality, and ownership of the sources reporting, all backed by ratings from 3 independent news monitoring organizations. Let me show you how some of it works. You can use Ground News to compare how the same story is being reported on in various different outlets. Take this story about Project 2025 co-author Russell Vought discussing his plans for a second Trump presidency in hidden camera footage. As you can see at the top, this story is mostly reported on in left-leaning outlets with a few centrist outlets, and it isn't being reported on at all in right-leaning media. And by comparing the headlines, we can see what different outlets are emphasizing in this story. Salon is highlighting the fact that Vought claimed in the hidden camera footage that Trump was supportive of Project 2025's plans. The Intercept is raising alarm bells over Vought confirming that Project 2025 plans to ban all corn sites on the internet, while the more centrist publications like Newsweek have less eye-catching headlines. But Ground News doesn't just let me check the media bias on the articles I read. Features like the blind spot allow me to find the stories that aren't being reported on by one side of the political spectrum. Ground News has tons of features, and they're fully unlocked with the Vantage plan. You can subscribe through my link or scan the QR code for 40% off unlimited access to everything Ground News offers, but plans can start at less than $1 a month. Having a tool like Ground News will help you sort through the bullshit. Check out the link in my description, ground.news/hoots, to give yourself the right tools to be informed without being misinformed. Thanks to Ground News for sponsoring this video. If you'd like to see an ad-free version of this and all of my videos, head to patreon.com/littlehoot. Is that it? Is that my Patreon? What the fuck is my Patreon? Patreon.com/littlehoot, right? Yeah. Head to patreon.com/hoot, littlehoot. Okay. Clearly, I am very bad at my job. If you'd like to see an ad-free version of this and all of my videos, head to patreon.com/littlehoot and become a member today. Wolternist, like the vast majority of the speakers in these leaked Project 2025 training videos, is a former staffer under the Trump administration, serving as the Assistant Secretary of Public Affairs at the Department of Homeland Security. Since leaving the Trump administration, he's gone on to co-found Athos, an agency and PR firm that seems to represent a few dozen right-wing authors and remains optimistic about representing TV and film talent one day. Wolternist seems an odd choice to be the face of conservatives working with the media because this man is utterly Rizless. In fact, he has negative Riz. He is up to his eyeballs in Riz debt, and he is close to defaulting on his Riz loans. His speech is awkward and stilted, and he has this air of barely contained rage and bitterness that just screams, "You'll pay for this when Father finds out." Alexei Wolternist's first recommendation for incoming appointees is to have a sense of ownership. He accuses Republican staffers of craving approval from the media for doing their job, and chalks this up to what he describes as an inferiority complex amongst communications staffers.
And you'll notice time and time again, for those staffers who go in, they frankly embarrass themselves because they're craving that approval.
Oh, he's mad. He's big mad. Jennifer at work got invited to coffee with Ross Douthat one day in 2018, and Alexei has been whispering imprecations on her name for the last 2,000 nights. Walternist asks his audience to consider if they're entering a conservative administration for the right reasons, or if they're just doing it to build their public profile. And that's such a valid question, because as a YouTuber, I know firsthand that conservatives working with and in the media are ideological purists who face an uphill struggle in a hostile media landscape not utterly dominated by culture war nonsense easily weaponized by the right wing in order to monopolize the attention economy. Alexei then warns that Democrat staffers will get big payouts and careers in lobbying Fortune 500 companies and as spokespeople after leaving an administration, but not Republicans. Nobody picks me.
If you're going into a liberal administration, after you finish, there's the big payouts, the Fortune 500 company jobs, the big lobbying jobs, the big spokesperson jobs. That frankly doesn't exist for a lot of those who work in a conservative administration.
I do not know where he is getting this information. The revolving door between lobbying jobs and jobs on the Hill is well known, and it's not just limited to Democrats. And most CEOs at Fortune 500 companies have overwhelmingly supported Republican administrations. So it doesn't seem like they'd have much of an issue hiring former Republican staffers. And there are plenty of private Christian universities and law schools that offer lucrative teaching and speaking jobs to conservatives. The only way this logic kind of logics is if you replace the word conservative with Trump. Because while most corporate entities, universities, and institutions are very welcoming to most mainstream Republicans, Trump is wildly unpopular with many of them. So it stands to reason that maybe they'd be a little bit leery of hiring his friends. Also, maybe Alex Walternist's personal experiences have biased him a little bit, because I imagine that many of his job applications have never made it past the interview stage. Maybe you'd get more jobs if you didn't have the charisma of an empty shoebox, Alexei. He claims that staffers fall into the trap of trying to audition for the jobs that will go to liberals, basically establishing a reality where that is a pipe dream. Therefore, it's more in service of the administration and the staffer watching this video right now to not be cooperative with legacy media. He says that your job as a political appointee is a job in public service, and you are there to serve the American public. Good. Very good. And you are there to serve the president and the president's agenda. Okay. The president and the president's agenda is a recurring theme in this video, in particular because he is preparing future appointees for a reality in which the president's agenda is at constant odds with the media. It won't be at odds with the American people because they elected the president, more or less, but it will be at odds with the media, who are not the people. In fact, they might even be the enemy of the people. And you, as an appointee working with the media, have to be ready to be the president's first line of defense, most likely putting your own career and reputation on the line in service of whatever undemocratic nonsense he's feuding with the media about today.
And done right, you give more than you get back. So the whole mentality of you're going in to advance your career, to make a name for yourself, or to find some promising, lucrative job after the fact, it's very misguided, but also it's very transparent, and you can tell that's what people are in it for.
My personal conspiracy theory is that Alexei went into the Trump administration thinking that the quirky Rasputin drip would be his signature thing, like the hair and the self-tan are Donald soup signature things, and that he'd be the next big conservative superstar. And very quickly figured out that he's the guy who gets pushed into lockers by guys who got pushed into lockers. Bro is so uncool, he makes Ben Shapiro look like fucking Idris Elba.
Every time you talk with the media, you're going to be dedicated to the important things. What is my job in disseminating information to the public? You're not going to be seeking their approval. And you're going to be focused on implementing the president's agenda. And you're going to also keep touch with the American people. Oftentimes when you're communicating with the public, you can feel this pressure from legacy, mainstream, liberal media outlets to tell them what they want to hear rather than what the people elected for the president to enact.
Alexei then reminds future appointees of their place in the whole process and reminds them that not everyone working in communications will get to be in front of the camera and be the press secretary, which seems like an unnecessary management of expectations. Like, it's pretty obvious that most political appointees are not going to be expecting the position of White House press secretary, seeing as only one person is going to be the press secretary. Like, it seems like a very weird thing to warn people about, unless you buy the theory that Alexei is personally bitter and resentful because he imagined it was going to be his face up there in lights until Trump picked that hag, Kayleigh. He also mentions how people in these positions think to themselves, if only I do enough behind the camera work, then maybe I'll get to be in front of the camera.
If only I do enough behind camera work, then I'll get in front of the camera.
And I have to ask, Alex, do people think that to themselves? Or did Alexei Wilderness think that to himself? He's so boring. Like, I have to imagine him as a bitter, jaded starlet jilted by the industry and ready to throw himself off the Hollywood sign just to get through this fucking video. He then underlines the importance of implementing the president's agenda again and preempts accusations of appointees ruining things, hand-waving any criticism of unelected appointees as little more than frustrated bureaucrats.
Another important matter to understand is your duties as a political appointee. Whenever you're in a position like this, you are in a position of the public trust, where you work on behalf of the American people, and you also have another job to implement the agenda of the president who is elected. Oftentimes, when people are in these positions, they'll talk about political appointees almost as they're ruining a system that's working effectively without them. But actually, the opposite is true. Without political appointees, the government has no real way to implement the will of the president. That is a bureaucracy who is running things rather than the president himself.
He identifies career officials as these sort of stewards of the government, like they're the fucking White House janitors or something. And he says that these unelected political appointees are there actually to enforce the president's will.
The career officials are there to arguably keep the regular functioning parts of the government running, but the political appointees are there to be the direct will of the people in implementing the president's agenda.
He is setting up future political appointees to be somewhat in conflict with career politicians, and definitely in conflict with the mainstream media, who he views as fundamentally hostile to President Trump's, meaning Project 2025's, vision.
When you are in these positions, particularly when you're communicating with the media, it is important to let them know this thing that you elected the president to do, they are doing it.
He then goes on this vague rant about how the media and career bureaucrats will try to limit your powers with the media by saying that you can't say anything too political. And he sort of vaguely relates to the Department of the Interior's digital team. Like, I had to use Google just to figure out what the fuck he was whining about. So basically, in October of 2020,
election year,
there were concerns that a video the Department of the Interior released on their Twitter praising the Trump administration might violate the Hatch Act, which limits certain public political activity for government employees. Basically, in the US, we prefer our government propaganda to come from Marvel movies, not from the National Park Service. Despite these concerns, the Department of the Interior's ethics office ultimately signed off on the video, and the tweet is still up. But what Alexei Wilderness is pissing and moaning about is that there is even an ethics office with lawyers to sign off on tweets in the first place, which is a wild thing for the co-founder of a PR firm to be upset about. Like, if I was your client, the bare minimum I would expect is that you be proofreading my tweets to make sure they're not breaking any federal laws. But then he advocates talking to lawyers and asking them, is this legal? So I don't know what girly pop even knows what she's advocating for. She's just bitter, she hasn't had her coffee this morning, and she needs you to know it. I'm like, relatable. Next, Alexei tells us how the media works. He tells us there are two categories of media. The first is legacy media, consisting of the major newspapers and networks.
The second category is what many would consider the more political or partisan media, which would include outlets that most of you probably read, like The Federalist, The Daily Caller, the Washington Free Beacon, the Daily Signal.
He criticizes the mentality of craving the approval of legacy media and treating conservative media like second-tier media. And I agree with him that conservative media is not second-tier. It's gotta be D-tier at best. The mixed in that mixed factuality rating for the Daily Caller over on Ground News is doing a lot of work. They must get points for spelling their names right. Alex then brings up the money in legacy media, highlighting the fact that they need to create salacious content in order to get eyeballs so that they can sell ads, unlike the principled journalists over at the Daily Caller and Fox News. Girlie, I know that revenue in media is a huge problem, but let's not pretend it's the exclusive or even primary domain of the Washington Post and the Atlantic. If I accidentally click on a Fox or a New York Post link, my ad blocker starts sending me suicide threats. Who do you think you're fooling? Well, people who don't read legacy media, obviously. He warns against getting too cozy with legacy outlets.
If the New York Times is writing a glowing profile on you, you're doing something wrong. Because they are certainly to the left, and if you're serving a conservative administration, you should not be getting glowing reviews from the left.
He then goes on to say that people will try to get legacy media approval by leaking. Trump's first term was infamous for many juicy leaks, some of which were published into best-selling books we all bought, read, and immediately forgot about. And listen, I'm sure some of the appointees who leaked to the media were doing so to facilitate a simpatico relationship with the press. But also some of them were doing it because Trump and half the people he appointed were fucking coconuts and messy, and that tea was too hot to stay in the cup. Like, I'm sorry you weren't likable enough to be in the burn book group chat, Alex, but sometimes you just gotta blow off some steam and talk shit about your boss over some apple teenies with some of the bitches from the New York Times. And if the goss is juicy enough, they might even give you some answers for tomorrow's spelling bee.
They want leaks to stymie any type of conservative administration agenda.
No. They want leaks because it's a good story, dipshit. This victimhood conspiracy theory shit is honestly getting weird. The reason they're leaks and not a press release in the first place is usually because it's something an organization doesn't want the public to know about, and the blank that they don't want you to know about is always a good headline. And then he dunks mercilessly on conservative voters.
The American people who vote for a conservative presidential administration, they're not reading the New York Times. They're not reading the Washington Post. Actually, to the contrary. If those outlets publish something, they're going to assume it's false.
The American people who vote for a conservative president, they're not reading the New York Times. They're not reading the Washington Post. They're reading Minions memes on Facebook, and they're scared. He says that the only way to reach conservative voters is through conservative media outlets.
For many of these people, if it's not in these conservative outlets, it didn't happen or it's not true.
Notice how he's not saying because it actually didn't happen or because it actually isn't true. But the conservative perception of mainstream media being untrustworthy is deliberately pushed by partisan media. He claims that over the past few decades, legacy media have attacked conservatives and then have been shown to have been lying or reported something that is false. Which just feels like another ad for the Ground News Factuality Checker. Please go sign up for them so that they give me more money.
So the conservative media can bring a certain credibility to the table, but also they can bring a reach that you can't have otherwise.
So true. What you really need is credibility when dealing with a demographic that eats horse paste and thinks that their grandchildren are being forced to pee in a litter box at public school. Alex carries on with more borderline conspiracy nonsense about how legacy media doesn't want to make conservative administrations look effective, before conceding that the only thing legacy media is really good for is factually covering what is occurring.
They can factually cover what is occurring.
Like, sure, legacy publications can be relied on to report facts and pursue truth or whatever. But are those really things we want from our media? Alexei then recommends giving conservative media outlets scoops and embargoing information for them because they need a little more help.
It's also important to keep in mind the resource disparity. If I'm a legacy media outlet, I have hundreds or sometimes even thousands of reporters that I can throw on beats upon beats.
They're just a little guy, and it's their birthday. They're a little birthday boy.
Sometimes you need to do a little bit of hand-holding, where you reach out to an editor beforehand, you can embargo something, and help them with their resource allocation just by simply giving them a heads up.
The last thing Alexei discusses are tactics for communicating with the American people. He tells appointees that they need to be part of drafting any and all press releases in order to maintain control of messaging to the American people. Your press release can't simply tell the truth, because telling the truth can be bad messaging for the American people. You should also spice up those press releases because the American people are stupid and inattentive. They're on their phones. In fact, I bet you're on your phone right now. Shame on you. He encourages appointees to make background calls and have off the record discussions with various outlets, dangling access to officials in exchange for positive coverage. Maybe he is a good PR guy after all.
The media needs to understand that you are a gatekeeper and that you're going to help them do their job, and you need to create an incentive structure where they want to come to you rather than go around you. So by helping them do their job better, by setting them up with important officials who are making decisions, you can help them trust you that you're in the know, but also help them come to you when they're writing a story.
If a journalist is interviewing you about a potentially damaging story, Alexei recommends throwing them off by essentially negging them.
And say, what are the facts as you understand them? What facts can I give you that could tell you that you're wrong? And that oftentimes will take them aback because they're never really asked that. And also you can ask them about how they're doing their job. You can say, okay, you're writing this story. Am I the last call that you're making? Who else have you talked to? Have you been researching this? Or ask them about how they came to the conclusions they have.
I like your beard, Alex. Do you normally groom it, or did you just not have time this morning? The game came out in 2005, Alex. No one is going to be thrown off by your weak-ass negs, especially not a New York Times journalist on the White House beat. The last thing Alex discusses is op-eds and speeches. For crafting a speech for public-facing officials in a future Trump administration, Alexei Wolternist urges appointees not to get caught in the churn of rushing out speeches and to plan some of them ahead by asking themselves the following questions.
What would a life-changing speech look like? What would a speech be like that everyone is talking about for the next few months? What does a speech look like that the New York Times editorial board is going to have a meltdown over?
Stunning. Set your goals and your dreams high, Alex. He closes out with this banger.
But if you truly decide to make a sacrificial move and sacrifice for your country, and that's your reason for serving, everyone will be able to tell, and your country will be better for it.
So I want to close this video by honoring those who made the ultimate sacrifice for their country. Political appointees in the Trump administration. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your sacrifice. Please like, comment, and subscribe. I'm dying over here.